Over the last half-century, major paradigm shifts have altered the relationship between biblical studies and biblical archaeology, creating two distinct disciplines. Where once biblical archaeology was taught as part of the larger biblical curriculums of seminaries and Bible colleges, today, archaeology is most often taught in schools of anthropology or the ancient Near East. Now that archaeology has become an independent discipline, there are now many academic journals and books geared directly towards archaeology, and these studies usually only mention the Bible in passing. Adding to the division between archaeology and biblical studies were the sizable advancements made in biblical literary studies during the same time periods. These literary studies grew in popularity and caused a major decrease in the historical studies of the Bible, including archaeological ones. By the turn of the new millennium, very little archaeological data was finding its way into biblical studies works. In 2004, the Society of Biblical Literature responded to that dilemma by producing the book Between Text and Artifact, Integrating Archaeology in Biblical Studies Teaching. The editors plainly conceded that there is a need in the field of biblical studies for the integration of archaeological and literary studies. So, perhaps it is pertinent for all Bible students to think about why we excavate and use archaeological data. First, biblical archaeology helps add textual depth. Communicators throughout history have demonstrated the effectiveness of adding depth and dimension. Jesus very often used parables and objects to add understanding to his teachings. Old Testament prophets like Jeremiah and Ezekiel also added depth to their messages through objects or dramatic examples. Using archaeological data in biblical studies can likewise add depth and dimension to our understanding of the biblical text. Archaeologists commonly use the word illumination when speaking about this capability of archaeological data. Alfred Hirth writes, "The most important contributions of archaeology to biblical studies are the various ways it illuminates the cultural and historical setting of the Bible, adds to our knowledge of the people, places, things, and events in the Bible, and aids in translation and exegesis of biblical passages." Second, biblical archaeology wields an apologetic force. Apologetics is the giving of reasoned arguments to justify or support something, especially justifying and supporting one's views of the Bible. It is generally accepted that theological issues in the Bible, such as God told David that Solomon would build the temple, cannot be proven through the historical data of archaeology. Archaeology can prove a building was built, but how could archaeology prove that God commanded them to build it? Archaeological data, however, can be used apologetically to support one's view about the historical trustworthiness of the Bible. The very nature of history helps to clarify how. Ian Provan states that, "History, it turns out, is indeed fundamentally the believing of someone else when that person says that he remembers something." Provan concludes by saying that studying the testimony of the Bible along with other testimonies should be considered perfectly rational. So scholars and students should review and compare the testimonies of archaeological data with the biblical text to identify any connections, parallels, or divergences. And in that way, archaeology wields an apologetic force toward one's understanding of the Bible. Third, biblical archaeology expands biblical knowledge. Proverbs 18:15 says, "The mind of the prudent acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge." Knowledge is indeed a great thing to acquire, and by studying archaeological data from biblical lands and time periods, our knowledge of the Bible is expanded in a myriad of ways. The basic expansion of biblical knowledge is reason enough to excavate and study biblical archaeology. Fourth, biblical archaeology generates a desire for further study. People are generally interested in ancient archaeological discoveries. One famous example occurred in 2010 when headlines exclaimed that Noah's Ark had been found once and for all. Despite the skeptical opinions of archaeologists, this excavation news made major headlines, including local and world news outlets, and gained internet acclaim. While the discovery did indeed turn out to be a hoax, Kurdish workers had hauled wood up to the top of Mount Ararat to dupe travelers into the discovery. The rapid and widespread news of the discovery demonstrates there is a strong fascination with biblical issues and archaeology. If using archaeological data helps generate a greater desire for biblical study, then excavating and studying biblical archaeology alongside our Bible studies will be well worth the effort. In conclusion, there are at least 4 reasons why we excavate and use biblical archaeology. Helps add textual depth. 2. Wields an apologetic force. 3. Expands biblical knowledge. 4. Generates a desire for further study.
Thank you for watching this video. To keep Theology Academy videos free, please consider making a tax-deductible donation at www.theology-academy.org/donate.